4 years after my husband passed, a notary called me from a number I didn't know and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I found a sealed envelope your husband left in our vault, addressed to you. Please come to my office tomorrow, and I'd ask you not to mention this to anyone in the family just yet." When I finally learned what was inside, everything I thought I understood about my own life cracked open like ice on the lake in April. Good day to you, my dears. It's Donna here again, and I'm so glad you've stayed to keep me company. Please give this little video a like if you can, listen all the way through, and do tell me in the comments which town or city you're listening from. It warms my heart to know how far these stories travel. I'm somewhere near Peterborough myself, where the snow this past winter buried the porch steps clean to the railing. For 41 years I believed I knew my husband, Gerald, the way I knew the route from our kitchen to the mailbox at the end of the lane. We married young, both of us from Trenton, Ontario, and we built our life slowly, the way you stack cordwood for the winter, one steady armful at a time. Gerald drove a delivery truck for a furniture company out of Belleville for 33 years, and there was nothing flashy about him. He kept his receipts in a shoebox, paid the mortgage on the 15th of every month without fail, and never once in 4 decades did I have to wonder where he was. We raised our 2 daughters, Maureen and Karen, in a tidy bungalow with a maple out front that Gerald planted the spring Maureen was born. He coached the boys' hockey team at the arena every winter, even though we only had girls, because the league was short on volunteers, and he couldn't stand to see kids sitting on a cold bench with no one to put them on the ice. When his heart gave out 4 years ago, in the middle of shoveling the driveway after a February storm, I thought the grief would hollow me right out. But our girls came home. The neighbors brought casseroles for a month straight, and slowly, the days knit themselves back together. I lived quietly after that on Gerald's pension and my CPP and the bit of old age security that comes the end of every month. The house was long paid off. I didn't need much. I volunteered Tuesdays at the food bank, played cribbage with the ladies at the Legion on Thursday afternoons, and called my granddaughter in Ottawa every Sunday after supper. It was a small life, but it was honestly mine, and after 41 years of looking after everyone else, the peace of it felt like a gift. Then came that gray morning in late October, the kind where the sky sits low over the fields and you can smell the first hard frost coming. The phone rang while I was wrapping my dahlia tubers to bring down to the cellar. I didn't recognize the number, a Kingston exchange. A woman's voice, careful and professional, asked if she was speaking with Mrs. Donna Caldwell. I said she was, and I set down my garden shears on the workbench. "My name is Anne Fournier," she said. "I'm a notary with a firm here in Kingston. I'm sorry to telephone you out of the blue, but I need to ask you to come in and see me, ideally tomorrow morning. It concerns your late husband's estate." My stomach dropped a little. The estate had been settled 4 years back. Gerald's will was as plain as he was. Everything to me, with small remembrances set aside for the girls. There was nothing left to settle. Mrs. Caldwell, she went on, gentler now. "While we were transferring some older files after a colleague of mine retired, we came across a sealed envelope your husband left in our keeping. It's addressed to you in his hand, and it's marked to be opened only under certain circumstances. I'd very much rather explain in person." She paused, and I heard her choosing her words the way you'd pick your steps across river ice. "And Mrs. Caldwell, I'd ask you, just for now, not to discuss this with anyone in your family. There are some complications." "I don't say that lightly. Complications? What on earth do you mean?" "Tomorrow at 10, if you're able. My office is on Brock Street. Please come on your own. I promise it will make sense once you're here." And she gave me the address and rang off before I could press her, leaving me standing in my cellar with the cold concrete under my slippers and my heart going like a rabbit's. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay on my side of the bed, still my side, after all this time, and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that Gerald always meant to fix. A letter, after 4 years. Why would a man like Gerald, who couldn't keep a secret to save his life, who told me what he paid for a liter of milk, leave a sealed letter with a notary and tell no one? And what could possibly be a complication with the family? Our girls were good girls. We had no enemies. By the time the furnace kicked on at dawn, I'd worn myself ragged with wondering. I dressed carefully the next morning in the navy dress I'd worn to Gerald's funeral because it seemed like the right armor. I was just pulling on my coat when Maureen called. "Morning, Mum. Want me to drive you to your physio today?" "Oh, no need, love. I've cancelled it. I've a few errands in Kingston, that's all." The lie sat in my mouth like a cold stone. I have never been a liar. Gerald and I prided ourselves on that. But Mrs. Fournier's voice was still in my ear. "Not with anyone in your family. You sure you're all right, Mum? You sound off. Right as rain. I'll call you tonight." The drive to Kingston took the better part of an hour down the 401, the lake gray and restless off to my right. The notary's office was on the second floor of an old limestone building downtown, the kind they've kept up nicely. A young man showed me into a small room with a window looking out over the street, and a woman of perhaps 50 rose to meet me, her face kind but serious. "Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for coming on short notice. Please, sit. Can I bring you a tea?" "Just tell me what this is about," I said. "I haven't slept a wink." She reached into a folder and drew out an envelope, the paper gone the color of weak tea with age. The moment I saw the writing on the front, my breath caught. It was Gerald's hand, no mistaking it, that careful, slightly cramped print he used for anything important. For Donna. "To be opened only if the family takes you to court." "Court," I whispered. "What court? What is this, Mrs. Court?" Fournier folded her hands on the desk. "Mrs. Caldwell, before you read it, there's something you have to know. 11 days ago, your daughter Karen and your husband's daughter from his first marriage, Sharon, filed an application in the Superior Court. They're contesting your husband's will. They're claiming you exerted undue influence over Gerald in his last years, that you isolated him, and that assets were hidden from the estate. They're asking the court to set the will aside and redistribute everything." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Karen, my own Karen. And Sharon, Gerald's daughter from before me, the girl I'd tried for 30 years to fold into our family, who'd sat sullen at every Christmas and taken every check, and never once said thank you." "That's not possible," I said. "Karen wouldn't." "And Gerald's first wife. They parted before I ever met him. Sharon was raised by her mother out in Alberta. She barely knew him. I'm afraid the application is very real. And according to what your husband wrote," she nodded at the envelope, "he feared exactly this." She slid a letter opener across to me, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't manage the seal. She took it back gently, slid it open, and handed it to me. The page inside was covered in Gerald's writing, and I could tell by the way the letters cramped and wandered that he'd written it near the end, when his hands had gone stiff with the arthritis he never complained about. "My dear Donna," it began, "if you're reading this, then the thing I feared most has come to pass, and I'm not there to stand beside you. I'm sorry for that, more than I can say. I should have told you while I was still breathing, but I was a coward about it. I kept hoping I was wrong about them. You know, I never spoke much about Sharon. The truth is her mother poisoned her against me from the time she could walk, and no check I ever sent, no birthday I ever drove to Calgary for, ever closed that gap. Sharon believes I owe her, and she's spent her whole life waiting to collect. What you don't know is that these last few years, she got her hooks into our Karen. I saw it happening at the cottage, the two of them off whispering on the dock, but I told myself I was an old fool seeing shadows. Here is what they don't know. There's the life insurance through my union, $250,000, with you as the sole beneficiary. They may have caught wind of that, but there's something else. When my brother Ron passed and left me the lakefront lot up near Bancroft, I didn't sell it the way I told the girls I did. I put the proceeds and the land into a trust 3 years ago. It's worth better than $600,000 now with how the cottage country prices have run. Only you and the notary know it exists. It is yours, Donna. Every cent of what we built is yours. They will not stop on their own. They believe they deserve it more than you do. Don't you let them take it. You fought harder things than this in your life. You fought to keep us afloat the winter I was laid off. You fought when Maureen was sick. Fight this too. The notary holds everything you need. I love you. I'm sorry to leave you to it. Yours always, Gerald. I read it 3 times. Each time the words went a little deeper, like cold water finding its way through a coat. My Karen. The baby I'd walk the floor with for hours when she had the croup, whose university tuition we'd scrimped for, who'd cried on my shoulder when her marriage broke up. She was doing this to me. How much are they asking for? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Mrs. Fournier checked her notes. Their position is that as the surviving spouse, you should receive only a portion of the estate, with the remainder divided among Gerald's children. They're also arguing the life insurance ought to be split among all the children equally, rather than paid out to you as named. If they succeeded, you'd likely have to sell the house to divide the assets. You'd be left with a fraction of what you have now. I thought of the bungalow, of the maple Gerald planted, of selling the only home our girls had ever known, so that Sharon could finally collect on a grudge she'd nursed for 30 years. And the trust? I asked. The land in Bancroft? That, she said, and for the first time something flickered in her eyes that wasn't quite a smile but was close to it, is the part they know nothing about. And so long as we're careful, it stays that way until the moment it serves you best. But Mrs. Caldwell, I'll be honest with you. This won't be pleasant. Sharon has retained a litigator out of Toronto, a man who specializes in these estate fights and isn't fussy about how he wins. They'll allege elder abuse. They'll say you cut Gerald off from his children, that you manipulated a grieving, declining man. That's a filthy lie. The heat rose up my neck. Gerald limited contact with Sharon because every visit ended with her hand out and a sob story. And Karen came to Sunday supper every week until about 2 years ago, and then it tapered off, and now I see why. She was off in the corner with Sharon the whole time, the pair of them thick as thieves. He saw it coming, Mrs. Fournier said quietly. He prepared for it. I got up and went to the window and looked down at Brock Street, at people going in and out of the shops, carrying coffees, living their ordinary, unremarkable lives the way I had been living mine just a day before. And standing there, something hard and cold settled into my chest, and I almost welcomed it. Gerald had known. He'd trusted me to fight. And I had spent 41 years beside a man who taught me by his own quiet example that you do not back down to a bully. Not ever, no matter whose face they're wearing. What do we do? I said, turning back around. We did a great deal. Over the next weeks, I learned more about the law than I'd ever wanted to. Mrs. Fournier brought in a sharp estate lawyer named David LeBlanc, and the 3 of us mapped out the fight. First, a response arguing the will had been probated 4 years prior without challenge, and the claim was long out of time. Second, we'd gather every scrap of proof that my marriage was real, and that Gerald was sound in his mind right to the end. The cards, the photos, 4 decades of joint accounts, the minutes from the hockey league he ran himself the year before he died. Third, and this was Mr. LeBlanc's idea, we'd send a demand for disclosure of Sharon and Karen's own finances and communications. If they've been planning this, he said, there'll be a paper trail. People who plot together can never quite keep their mouths shut. I went home and sat at Gerald's old desk in the spare room, the one with the wobbly drawer he never fixed, and I made lists until 2 in the morning. Every loan Karen and her ex had asked us for and never repaid. Every Christmas Sharon had appeared only after the will became a subject. Every email. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. But I would fight it the way Gerald loaded that delivery truck, methodically, nothing left to chance. The worst of it came not from the court, but from my own kitchen. Maureen showed up unannounced 2 days later, her cheeks blotchy with anger, and she'd barely got her boots off before it spilled out of her. "Mum, what in God's name is going on?" Karen phoned me in absolute hysterics. "She says you've hired some Toronto lawyer to come after her, that you're hiding money from Dad's estate, that you've turned on the whole family." My heart sank into my shoes. Sit down, love. There's a great deal you don't know. I don't want to sit down. She paced my little living room like a cat in a kennel. Karen says you isolated Dad. She says Sharon has proof. She says you're trying to cut us all out. And you believe her? It came out harder than I meant it. Maureen stopped, and her eyes filled. I don't know what to believe, Mum. My sister's saying one thing. You've been sneaking off to Kingston telling fibs about physio, and there's a lawsuit nobody bothered to tell me about. So I told her everything. The phone call, the drive, the letter. When I handed her Gerald's pages, I watched her face go from fury to confusion to something close to heartbreak as she read her father's cramped writing. Dad knew, she breathed. He knew Karen would do this. He hoped he was wrong. So did I. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, and her jaw set hard. It's Karen. She's asking whose side I'm on, the family's or yours. She looked up at me, as if those are two different things. You don't have to choose anything, love. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. She stood up tall, more like her father in that moment than I'd ever seen her. They're coming after my mother. That makes it mine. That night, my youngest grandchild's mother, Maureen's girl in Ottawa, wasn't who I worried over. It was Karen. Around 9 the phone rang, and against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was wrong from the first word. Too smooth, coached. Mum, we don't have to do this in court. Just be reasonable. Sharon and I only want what's fair. Dad would have wanted us looked after. Your father left exactly what he wanted in his will, Karen. He left it to me, the way couples do, so the survivors looked after, and so it comes down to you girls in time, the way it always would have. That's not fair, and you know it. Sharon's owed. Sharon is owed nothing. My own calm surprised me. Your father drove to Calgary for her birthdays for years and got a slam door for his trouble. Now you tell me, is this you talking, Karen? Or is it her? There was a silence, and in it I heard everything I needed to. Then she said, cold as the lake in January, You'll regret this, and the line went dead. I sat there a long while with the dial tone humming, mourning my daughter as if she'd died, because in a way the girl I raised had. The disclosure was where it all came undone for them. Mr. Ged, LeBlanc's demand, pried loose months of messages between Sharon and Karen, and they were every bit as careless as he'd promised. There were texts from before Gerald was even buried. Sharon laying out the plan, telling Karen what to say, how to paint me, even a line about how they'd split it once the old girl folds. There were emails where Karen practiced the lies. And there was the thing that turned my stomach worst of all. They'd talk Sharon's mother, Gerald's first wife, into swearing an affidavit full of invented memories about how I'd kept Gerald from his daughter, when the woman had laid eyes on me perhaps twice in 40 years. The hearing was in March, one of those raw Kingston mornings where the wind comes straight off the lake and finds every gap in your coat. Maureen drove me down and held my arm up the courthouse steps. Sharon and Karen sat at the far table with their slick lawyer, and neither of them would look my way. Mr. LeBlanc and Mrs. Fournier sat with me, calm as still water. I won't pretend I followed every legal turn, but I followed enough. Their lawyer stood and spun his story, the controlling widow, the isolated old man, the hidden money. And then Mr. LeBlanc rose, quiet and unhurried, and one by one he laid it all out. The will, properly witnessed, the bank records of a shared life, the hockey league minutes in Gerald's own hand, the year he supposedly couldn't think straight, and then the messages. He read them into the record, flat and unsparing, the texts from before the funeral, the coaching, the affidavit they'd talked the first wife into swearing. I watched the color drain out of Karen's face. I watched Sharon's lawyer lean over and whisper something urgent, and I watched Sharon shake her head, furious, refusing to fold even now. The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and a voice like a closing door, did not take long. She found the will valid, Gerald of entirely sound mind, and not one shred of evidence of any influence or abuse. She said she'd sat on the bench many years and seen grief turn families inside out, but rarely had she seen a scheme so plainly premeditated, hatched before the man was even in the ground. She dismissed the application in full. She ordered Sharon and Karen to pay my legal costs, close to $90,000 between the two of them, for bringing a claim she called an abuse of the court's process, and she referred the matter of the false affidavit to be looked into further, warning Sharon's mother she may have committed perjury, which is no small thing in this country. She turned last to Karen, and her voice gentled not at all. Your father left you a meaningful inheritance to come in due course. You have now spent a small fortune in legal fees to attack the woman who raised you. You owe a costs award you cannot easily pay, and you have shattered your own family. I hope it was worth it. Karen had her head down and said nothing. When it was over, Sharon turned on Karen right there in the hallway, hissing that she'd been useless, that she'd ruined it, and Karen fired back that Sharon had promised it would be easy, that I'd just settle. Their lawyer was already 3 steps away, washing his hands of the both of them. Maureen folded me into a hug so fierce I could hardly breathe, and Mrs. Fournier shook my hand and said simply, "He'd be proud of you." In the hall, I passed Karen. She looked up, her eyes red and wild. "Mum, I'm sorry. I never meant—" "You meant every word of it," I said, and I was astonished at how steady I was. "You chose her poison over your own father's memory. You chose money over 41 years. Those were your choices, Karen. You'll have to live inside them now." And I walked past my daughter and out into the cold March light, and I felt my heart break and something in me come loose and lift at the very same time. The months after brought a kind of plain, quiet justice I never went looking for. Sharon's common-law partner left her once the lawyer's bills came due, and it turned out she'd remortgaged to fund the fight without telling him. Karen's relationship buckled under the strain and the shame of it. When neither of them paid the costs award, the court arranged to have it taken straight off their wages. They'll be paying me back a little at a time for years, though Lord knows I'd give it all up to have my girl back the way she was. The perjury matter against the first wife went forward. She avoided jail, but not the disgrace. I took no joy in any of it. I'm too old and have buried too many people to celebrate anyone's ruin. But I felt, for the first time in months, that I could stand straight. Gerald had been right about them, and right to trust me to hold the line. I sold the bungalow in the end, not because anyone made me, but because I was ready. I bought a bright little townhouse in a retirement community near Marine, with a sunroom that catches the morning light, and I filled it with the furniture I chose myself. I joined a watercolor class at the community center and made a mess of every painting and didn't care a bit. Maureen and I took a week out east, walked the red cliffs of Prince Edward Island, and ate more lobster than 2 women ought to. The money meant I could help with my granddaughter's education fund and put a little toward the food bank that had carried us through. This past spring, Maureen telephoned with the news that her daughter is expecting a girl in the fall and that they mean to call her Donna. "After everything you've stood through, Mum," she said, "we want her named for the strongest woman we know." I couldn't get a word out for the longest while. Some nights I take Gerald's letter out of the drawer and read it once more. Don't you let them take it. Fight. I did fight. I won. Not only in that cold courtroom, but in the getting back of my own life, my own quiet, my own quiet, my own days. And that, I've come to believe, was the true victory all along. So tell me, if you'd sat where I sat, would you have kept the peace and handed it over, or would you have stood your ground? I'd dearly love to know. Thank you for keeping me company, my dears. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and you are owed your dignity every single day of your life. I've turned this over in my mind more times than I can count, sitting in my sunroom with my cold tea, and I keep coming back to one plain truth. Nothing in this whole sorry business came out of nowhere. Sharon didn't wake up one morning and decide to hate me. That resentment was watered for 30 years, drop by drop, until it grew into something that could swallow a family whole. And Karen didn't betray me in a single afternoon either. It happened, the slow way, in whispers, on a dock. In supper invitations she stopped accepting. In 1,000 small choices to lean toward the easy lie instead of the hard truth. Choices have roots, and they have fruit. And by the time you taste the fruit, the roots are already deep. I learned that the dear, hard way. But here's the other half of it. Gerald's quiet decency wasn't an accident either. The man who balanced his checkbook to the penny and drove to Calgary for a girl who slammed the door in his face. That steadiness was a thing he built, day after ordinary day, until it became who he was. And when the storm came, his decency was what protected me. He'd done right so consistently, for so long, that the court could see it plain as the maple in our yard. Living honestly isn't dull, the way I used to half believe. It's the strongest insurance there is. If I could press one thing into the hands of anyone listening, it's that you must be three things at once, and you cannot skip a single one. You have to be good, actually good, in the small, unwatched moments, because that's the foundation everything else stands on. You have to be wise, to see clearly, to ask the hard question I finally asked Karen on the phone that night. Is this you talking, or is it her? To gather your facts and keep your wits when your heart is screaming. And you have to be tough. Not hard, not cruel, but able to hold your ground when someone you love is leaning on you to give up what's rightfully yours. I had all three only because I'd practiced them in smaller fights for 41 years. The winter Gerald was laid off, the months Maureen was sick. You don't grow that strength the morning you need it. You grow it long before in the dull ordinary days, so it's there when the gray morning comes. I lost a daughter in all this, and I'll grieve that till I'm in the ground. But I kept my home, my dignity, and the knowledge that I didn't fold. That's what I'd wish for you. Whoever you are out there listening, be good enough to deserve the fight, sharp enough to win it, and strong enough to see it through. The rest, the peace, has a way of following on its own.